Welcome to Edge of Intelligence, where we explore how AI, automation, and strategic systems shape the future of business. I'm Carl Owen, Fractional CIO and AI Advisor at Proteligen. Today I'm excited to host Gary Liu, a finance executive at BioAmerica, a firm that operates at the intersection of biotech innovation and capital markets. Gary's background spans accounting, investment, and financial operations with deep insights into what makes or breaks biotech ventures. Gary, great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Carl, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Let's begin at the start. How did you come to join or lead within BioAmerica, and what core problems in biotech finance were you determined to address in your role?
That's a great question. So, I'm actually from the tech world, more SaaS and platforms. I actually was at a pretty successful fintech prior to this. And I think one of the things that led me to Biomerica was their initiative. So, it's an actually interesting company to kind of walk through. It's almost 50 years old. It's been public for over 30 plus years. We're listed on the NASDAQ, but we found commercialization really early on, which is great, obviously as a med tech company. But they had spent about 10 years doing R&D, so we've done that. And on the other side, we have a new product that has a commercialization with a new verticality. So we've always kind of used distributors to help us sell through our items. And in this case, we're really trying to find physicians as well as now we have a direct to consumer arm to kind of sell to patients for our new Infuse IBS test. And so the question is, how do you go from a SaaS slash platform and startup environment to this one? And the answer is actually quite simple. It's pretty similar, quite honestly, when you talk about when you're trying to commercialize a new product, when you're trying to basically learn how to make the dog food, eat the dog food, and have someone basically buy the dog food, it doesn't matter if it's SaaS or not. I came from the fintech space, highly regulated, right? And so obviously is the space in the medtech space. And a lot of it, the principles are very similar, right? And foundationally, it's very similar. Just like, beyond commercialization, we can talk about G&A. Those are the things that really have, I think, parallels in terms of, well, just because you're a tech guy doesn't mean you can't do med tech. I think that's not true, and I think I'm proving the case not to be true.
I agree
So
with
that's one of the areas that I really wanted to be able to bring value, and they wanted to find someone that could really not only do the finance and accounting side, but really focus on figuring out how do we get this thing to market. So that's been a pleasure.
Well, in biotech, capital, science, and operations must align perfectly or there's a risk of failure. BioAmerica's role is to bridge those worlds. I want to explore how you see that mandate today. So, how do you define BioAmerica's mission and positioning in the biotech life sciences capital ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Carl. So I think when we think about America, we have almost two arms, right? We're really trying to have the best, I would say, products associated to helping people diagnose some specific issues. We have some colorectal, we have some breast cancer, we have some kidney and ulcers, but I would say with this new kind of quote unquote startup arm, if you will, we're really trying to change the way that I would say IgG tests, immunoglobulin tests are looked at. And one of the things, not to talk about any competition, if you will, but we really believe that this is a category creator. And we're in an industry in diagnostics where a lot of times the focus is I take a test to tell you what I need to do next. And often it's going to, go to the doctor or get a drug or wherever it may be. And I think we're really trying to change the landscape of how that's looked at, where a diagnostic could potentially be a therapeutic, right? And I think that there is a very large component here that is novel, that is personalized. And effectively, what we do is we are basically changing the game where we take basically a simple blood test. It tells you specifically if you suffer from the disease state of IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, and it'll tell you what to remove in your diet to make you feel better. And again, often what happens is when you have IBS, you basically get prescribed a drug when your pain and bloating becomes too much, right? So I think there's a lot of barriers we're trying to break here. And I think that that's kind of one of the areas that when I think about this industry, there's a lot of excitement. There's obviously a lot of different areas. I'm just going to focus on the diagnostic area because I know there's a lot of precision medicine that's happening with AI and other areas. But I think for us, since we're in a more, let's say, old school area. It's like, oh, here's a test, now go figure something out. We're really trying to turn that on its head.
Yeah, that kind of gets to the next question, right? So, what types of biotech or life science ventures do you typically work with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So largely because we have found commercialization in the past, we largely do it ourselves, if you will. We're really fortunate. We had a scientific advisory board that continues to support us through the Rome Foundation. It's basically like a GI think tank, Mayo, Harvard, Cleveland. They're all part of it, and they helped us through even the FDA clinical trials to kind of get this thing through. It's called a laboratory developed test, an LDT test. So I feel like a lot of it has to do with making sure the science behind it is strong. And also from another side, I did not mention, we are also a CDMO shop. So we do research, development, and manufacturing for others. And we typically look for someone that's in our space. And we have helped smaller startups who don't maybe fully have the know-how of taking, let's say, an idea or a concept all the way to manufacturing as an example. So I think we try to help smaller companies. We also larger companies, but I think our ethos, especially now we have this new kind of commercialization arm, is really to kind of assist in those areas. And it's rare to find, especially in Southern California, if you will, like a full sweep end-to-end development all the way to manufacturing to shipping kind of contract manufacturer, if you will. So I think that's kind of what we look at. And obviously when it comes to beyond the Rome Foundation, I would say the science side of the house, try to align ourselves with strong academic partners, if you will, as well. Because a lot of this is, like I said, category creation. A lot of the industry doesn't like tests like this because previously they were not prescriptive. It's like you kind of take a test, it kind of tells you relative sensitivities across way too many things. You might as well just drink water, and I think that's the difference between, yeah, what we have and what they have.
Makes sense. Well, what are the common financial, operational, or structural weaknesses you see in biotech startups that professionals underestimate?
Yeah, it all actually starts from the beginning. This is more of a startup question, not necessarily, industry specific. And I think it really starts with the founder, believe it or not. So it really starts with the vision, the dream. It also starts with how do you realize and execute the dream. On top of it, it also has to do with cap table management. And it also goes back to like that's more of the selfish side for the founder and their co-founders and the small team, right? Like 5, 10, 50, whatever you want to talk about. And I think that precedes a lot of the strategy. And if your answer is, I mean, to be blunt, the diagnostic space is getting kind of blown up right now. It's like I said, it's a tougher industry. And if you're a startup, you're going to be a $10 billion company as a diagnostic. That's not realistic. But if that is somehow your ethos and that's what you're going to do, and you're going to like burn baby burn to like figure out how you can become a 10 builder, the answer is focus on getting your milestones, your MVPs. Focus on having this dream become a viable product or at least some form of scientific component that is viable, right? So then you can get another investment round. And the next question is, and I would say the other piece is sometimes you may give away too much. Capital and the capital markets have loosened up a bit, but it goes back to, I think, one of the biggest mistakes that kind of mentioned earlier, like, well, what is it? I think a lot of it is really understanding what your value proposition is, making sure your investments are prudent in them, and more importantly, don't try to like overshoot and over manufacture. I would think that from a startup standpoint, especially in our space, often what you may do is you may look for something too specific that has a marginal improvement, but let's say the cost of feasibility is just too high. So the question is it really worth it? Because you do all this development, and the next thing you know, by the time you actually have to like develop a test, the test is too expensive and it's only marginally like better than the competition, your entire basis is messed up, right? So I think that those are some of and it goes back to vision, right? Like, well, I want to make the best test ever, but you don't think about if it's commercialized, able because it's just too expensive. Like, and that's where it just goes back to making sure you have a good grounding between your founding vision, execution, and also like don't get too big for your britches.
Makes perfect sense. Well, how does BioAmerica blend financial discipline and scientific risk to structure investments and partnerships?
That is a very good question as well. I think very carefully. We have a luxury that we have a sales, right? I think that is one of the components that some of the startups don't get that luxury. if you will. And I would say because of that, we have an ability to be more measured in our risk taking. As you can imagine, sometimes if you're a startup, you might need to give up the farm. You might need to, take some really strong risks to really have it pan out. So I think a lot of times it's about fit. It's a lot. We do some obviously modeling. We do obviously some research. We also utilize partnerships to really figure out what makes the most amount of sense. But a lot of people don't have those resources, right? So I think from a startup standpoint, um, I would hope as you're a founder or you're a smaller shop, you are making some very strong networks in the industry. Because I believe if you don't have the capital, that's probably a good place to start, where you can get a lot of information. You can do a lot of your due diligence, if you will, and also like risk factoring just by being around. And if you're just like really good at science, you don't want to talk to anyone, like, well, you better find someone that is to help you fill that void.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, in early stage biotech, financial projections, scenario models, and risk assessments are often they're brittle at best. Adding automation and smart
Mhm.
modeling can make or break funding decisions. Let's dig into that a little bit. What financial modeling or projection workflows have you built or improved at BioAmerica? Capital raises, burn modeling, milestone payments, scenario stress tests?
Yeah, we are a public company, so I'll keep it more broad. And I mean, the good thing is the answer is yes for all of them. And I think it goes back to the financial discipline is a little bit different. We for instance have our core business, and we have this new kind of in foods IBS arm, if you will. And each one requires, as you can imagine, a different model. And each one requires, I would say, the strongest component to kind of tie it all together would really be the capital allocation, right? You really want to understand, well, how much do we want to put into the core business and have that grow? On the other end, how much do we want to really kind of go in on the in foods IBS component? So I think that that is one of the tricky balances, but we do a lot of those things from a data standpoint. I think that that's probably the bigger component. So many people have now said garbage in, garbage out. It's probably way overused. But it goes back to like you can do all the modeling you want, but if you don't have a solid foundation of base of data and having a very strong data flow in order to articulate what's happening in the business, I think that that is actually the first step. And that's one of the areas that we really had to kind of develop because we are an old company. We have some older systems, if you will. So we kind of make do and had to, obviously use SaaS platforms, use some RPAs, macros, AI. There's something we've used some things there too as well to help enable the data to a more data, cleaner data, better flow of data. So then we can kind of do, I would call the standard modeling that you had mentioned.
Do you or your team leverage advanced analytics or AI to support due diligence or risk scoring of biotech ventures?
Yeah, so I would say we have not fully adopted the modeling side of AI. So we've used a lot of data scrubbing in those areas. Now I know that's already happening, quite honestly, right? The investment for it, again, kind of going back to capital allocation, we're not fully there yet. I think there's value in there, but we're small enough, nimble enough that I don't know right now. It doesn't seem like something we would fully invest in. But I can tell, for instance, for those who are probably either more mature or have the full capital that they want to ride on some of this, that it would be something really good.
What challenges do you see that are arising in integrating scientific data, operational metrics, and financial forecasts?
There's a lot. I mean, I think, coming from a tech background, that was one of the hardest things for me to really understand the life science space, to understand some of the regulatory QA, QC areas that you had mentioned. How do you tie that back to operations, right? Because we're FDA, ISO, everything certified. And there's a lot of things between exactly how you mentioned the QA, QC of the house, the operational side of the house, and the financial side of the house. And I think the first step, which probably unlike some of your other guests, I'm relatively new in the space. I used to be in it, but then it's been a while. I was mostly in tech and platforms, like I mentioned earlier, and even enterprise semiconductors. But like I said earlier, once you understand it, it just goes back to what I mentioned when we first started, right? A business is a business. Whether you're selling sandwiches, semiconductors, or in foods IBS, the most important part is you understand the end-to-end workflows. You understand, I would also say the data points, the pain points, and you imagine just like anything else, you try to fill the gap. Maybe you fill it internally. Maybe you find a tool. Maybe you find a partner. Really streamline some of those things. And more importantly, you got to put it together with the global vision, right? What am I even trying to achieve here? Why do I even want this data? And I think that that is where being able to look at all those different areas. I know I didn't fully answer your question, but my point really is you need to look at it comprehensively. You need to look at all the different areas, and then you have to see it almost like an end to end. I think that's where, as executives, we really are trying to steer the business with all these different components. And I do think that as you get more into the details, that's really when you want to start filling those gaps I'd mentioned, or create those integration points and bridges that may have not existed prior.
That makes perfect sense. As
Mhm.
we talk about models, one of the challenges we all deal with, right, is the biases that are inherent in the models. So
Mhm, mhm.
how are you guys guarding against model overconfidence or bias or optimism syndrome in startup projections?
You know, you get through COVID. Before, if you think it doesn't matter what industry you're in, and man, the capital markets, the VC money, once everyone kind of realized that once the yield was basically zero, money was just flowing like crazy. You just had to have a good idea or even a semi good idea and you can get funded. And overconfidence was like, I'm going from no rev to like 300 million. Okay, great. That sounds like a great idea. I think we've all learned a lot from the last couple of years. We've all understood that there was probably, and look, it's unprecedented to have a pandemic. It's unprecedented to see how much we've seen grow, especially from the digital side of the house, whether it be look from remote, look at Zoom. Now it's like Kleenex, it's common in its name and its commons usage, and then the way that we do things, and then now the emergence of AI, crypto, blockchain. There's all these things that are emerging, and I think it just goes back to at the same time. Now people are looking for path to profitability. People are looking to see that you have a very good head on your shoulders and we're not kind of going on the good ideas. So to answer your question, I believe that because we've had the benefit and the pain, I would say, in the last 3 years of totally overvaluations, totally overconfidence, to getting smacked around because of that. Quite honestly, you look at almost every company now, things are obviously surging back again, but it's because the path of profitability and I would say the conservatism has now been put into place. And I think that's where it allows you to go like, does this actually make sense? So you have some history here. And I think that that really helps proceed back to, let's say, 10 years ago, where modeling was a little more conservative.
But do you foresee offering tools or frameworks to portfolio companies to standardize forecasting or scenario modeling or dashboarding?
I think all of the corporate performance management tools would like to think so. But in reality, I think that every company has a different need. Like, look, headcount model, whatever, right? Same thing. Maybe your annual operating plan from a consolidation standpoint, same thing, right? Three statements, whatever. But I do think that the offerings, there will be um, some, almost everything is the same thing, and someone will figure out the secret sauce. But I also think that the best platform depends on your own company. We're very small, we're very nimble, so we don't want something bogged down. Like we would not go to, for instance, an SAP as an example for ERP. We wouldn't do a full work, blowout with maybe like Anaplan, not to name names, you know what I mean? But my point is we probably pick something a lot more nimble in size. But as you get larger and more complex, I think that's when you have to bring on the bigger players. So I don't think there's going to be, I think there's so much room for everyone. And I think that's the wonderful thing about the world we live in, and even just the literally SaaS, right? SaaS is you don't want to blow out an entire process, and you want something that kind of fits for you, right? That fits for a very specific need. I think there's always going to be a value proposition there. Maybe some consolidation in the space, but no, I really do believe that there's enough to go around for sure.
Makes perfect sense. Well, as BioAmerica grows its portfolio and operations, the internal systems and processes are going to have to scale. Either it's deal management, monitoring, reporting, governance. Getting those right behind the scenes is often harder than the scientific breakthroughs. At least that's what I'm seeing with my clients. They're struggling with that.
Mhm.
What operational bottlenecks or pain points do you face now from deal sourcing, monitoring, reporting, whatever it is?
No, I think. from your client standpoint, I would agree. Sometimes when it comes back to when you've made that large hurdle and you've crossed it, which is a huge relief, which we've also done through like 10 years of R&D, the next step is complicated. Beyond the commercialization, I think, there's a lot to consider there, but just from an infrastructure standpoint. So I think that that's one of the things where you overdo it. You're like, well, let's just plan for the future. Let's put a lot of capital in there. But then let's say things don't pan out as quickly as you want, or it's not even as necessary. You don't necessarily need to build a battleship to crush an ant. It's one of those things where this is a tough question. I think my first focus is where I'm going to go back to what my principles are, right? If you can tell, I'm very focused on what the mission and the vision is. Step one. And I think that is what proceeds first. So if I'm thinking about capital, I'm thinking about how that goes. And that's also kind of working with founders or CEOs or boards. You want to make sure that you're not shooting to the moon. You're taking practical, executable steps. I think that's kind of the office of the CFO to help that happen. And I think that is step one. By really focusing on that, then you can start thinking about what are the other areas as we grow that you can maybe create a little bit of a pocket to make sure that you don't obviously get too behind, but you also don't overscale. And I think that is one of the areas where I would say it requires a lot of involvement. Maybe that's the secret there. A lot of people don't want to think about these things, or they don't want to take the time to work with their teams. They work in silos, even if they're small, right? And really having some team, I would say, synergies on figuring out from an operational standpoint where we stand, where we're going, and then really starting to identify where some of that capital can be, where some of the areas. So very clearly, if we were to, for instance, blow this in foods thing out of the water, since we just kind of came out of beta, if you will, um, I would say that we would need to do a lot of scalability related to infrastructure. Even just the number of transactions, we were used to using distributors. Now we have card swipes coming through from patients, right? So that is already different, and we have to figure out how do we manage that. And it could get really, really expensive. You want to build infrastructure, but we're just building out. So I think that's a very practical example. And then operationally, we have a lot of things I can't fully discuss because we're public, but there are some areas as well that will change as things scale. And then I think that's one of those things where it's the simple question or simple answer to your question would be you need to work together, which sounds so ridiculous, right? But a lot of times I don't think we do because we're so focused on just getting the next thing. And if you keep focusing on what's literally ahead of you versus having a full scope review with all of your leaders within the organization, um, I think that is honestly where you start. And then obviously finding the right partners, finding the right systems, finding the right capital allocations. But yeah, in short, I know that was really long, but effectively you need to talk to your teams, like quite honestly. That will help you understand the risk, de-risk, and also build a model, a foundation that you don't overbuild, nor do you wait in the shadows, suddenly explodes in a good way, and then you're not ready and you can't surface. And there's just a ton of lost opportunity because of it.
I think one of the key things you said there is keeping grounded with your mission and vision and keeping that in the forefront and sticking to that. That helps you keep from getting distracted and there's so many things out there that can do that. So I think that's a great approach.
Yeah, no, thank you, Carl.
Sure. Are there manual or semi-manual tasks out there that are dominating your team's time? I mean, I've got clients all over the place. One of the things that we're looking to do is automate some of their workflows, but the challenge is identifying what those roadblocks are, or where those manual processes are that are taking the team's time. So a lot of people don't even really have a solid understanding of what's going on in their own environment.
You are 100% right. And I think that's why people hire you, quite honestly. I actually am very fortunate. I don't have a traditional background in a sense. Yes, I'm a CPA. I've done finance areas as well, but I did some strategic consulting, and also I did a PMO of a Big Bang ERP system. I oversaw the BI component, which includes the data and the sales finance component. And that allowed me, working with like the big guys like Accenture, Capgemini, all those guys, you start seeing the philosophy of what I would say you're an expert, right? We kind of trust you to find some of these things, but sometimes if you don't even know what's wrong in your own shop, to your point, like how do I even know how to ask for help? So I think I've been really fortunate to have that experience to really look at end-to-end processes. And I would say like even a background at Ernst& Young really helps because you look at a lot of large financial processes end to end, and you compile that with the operational side, you compile that with the IT side of the house, and it starts helping identify those things. And I would say that's where someone like yourself is really helpful. Now the next question is, well, how does someone like me who doesn't know, let's say I don't know what I'm not really as certain, right? I'm not quite sure how do I know when to look for help? And I think the simple thing you can ask yourself is what are my people doing? Literally. If they're cutting physical checks, what are you doing? It just goes back to what are your people doing? And that seems okay. At home, are you cutting checks? And the answer is no. Largely, I'm just like wiring money or ACHing. Then the question is, maybe I should do that. And if you don't know where to start, then go call someone like Carl to like help you figure these things out. And I think that is the one part. I think just being blessed with being in tech, being in the startup environment, being in large Fortune 500 tech companies as well, you're almost being to submission with this idea of process improvement. Like my title, I think was like literally business transformation, right? When I was the kind of part of strategic consulting arm. And you already have that discipline built into you. And you also have, I would say, the expertise, plus you have the consultancy side to help you. And I think that it's a great benefit. So for those who may not be indoctrinated in the tech side of the house, I would say just ask yourself what you and your team are doing. Like literally ask yourself those and really not just be like, it's fine. Or like, how long does it take you to close your books? If you're a small company, it's taking you 20 days. Why is that? Why is that? And then it's like, you want to be public because you're a startup and right now it's taking you a full 30 days or you only close quarterly. Like, how are you supposed to give a proper forecast if you haven't gone to rolling forecast or a quarterly forecast? Or if you want to go public, how are you going to do your queues? How are you going to do your earning calls? Like, you need to clean that stuff up. And the question is, well, this is fine until it's not really going to cut it. And I think that that's the question. Ask yourself. If you're not quite sure, really you need to start thinking about or talk to your peers. We kind of talk about networking. Talk to your peers and go like, "Hey, it's taking me this long." And they're like, "What? 20 days? What are you doing?" You know? It's hard to look within. Sometimes when you don't have
Yes.
that mindset, but I would say that would be the first step. If you're watching this or listening to this and you're like, "Hey, who's he talking about?" It's like it could be you. Really start thinking about what you and your team are literally doing and if it even makes sense. I know this sounds so practical and ridiculous, but like I think that's where the first step goes.
Well, and that's where we need to start, right? If you can't answer that
Mhm.
question, you've got bigger problems.
I
Well,
agree.
how do you balance consistency, oversight, and flexibility across different portfolio companies with various maturity levels?
Yeah. So I will take this not from a BioAmerica standpoint. I'll take it from my previous experiences. So at BioAmerica, I can easily say that we have a parent company, basically parent companies in the US, we have a Mexico, and we have a Europe company, but they all consolidate pretty cleanly. And we really focus on integration points to make it more smooth. I would say for the larger companies that are disparate, and I mean, especially I was at a previously quite acquisitive company and we acquired a lot of companies. And you imagine not only the financial DD, it's going to be the integration component. What systems are they using? What processes, business processes are they doing and how well do they fit? And obviously that should have been done during DD, but as you know, a lot of times it's about dollars. It's like, oh, this is going to be good synergy from a dollar standpoint. We'll figure it out later. And then, people like us are stuck figuring it out later. But you know what? I think there's a lot of fun to that. It's actually one of my favorite parts of trying to understand. I would use the analogy of putting a square peg in a round hole, right? But I would manipulate. People may see it that way. They're like, "Oh, you're trying to jam it in." I think the beauty of it is like, well, you're kind of in charge here. You don't need to make it fit in that hole. You can maybe fine tune the hole and make it fit the peg, right? Or vice versa, maybe the peg is so out there, maybe you do need a quarantine or whatever it is, and that's more of a discussion you have to talk to your finance guys, like, why the hell did we do this deal for spending all this additional money trying to integrate them? But I would definitely say that ability to mold, to partner is always hard enough when you're getting acquired, from their side. I mean, just the emotional toll, the uncertainty, all those different areas. And I think it just goes back to the same thing. If you can create that relationship, that synergy. So at least they'll be willing to at least talk to you about their processes and really understand it. And you're really coming from a position of helping and not just gobbling them up and spitting them out or like swallowing them and never have them come back again. I think that at least creates that partnership atmosphere versus, hey, welcome to the hammer. You just got taken over. You got to give us everything. And I think that helps that. Go ahead.
I was going to say, you mentioned the integration side a couple of times, and
Hmm.
I think that is key. Companies that get that right are the ones that are successful. The ones that don't tend to struggle. I've been with several very acquisitive companies over the years, one of which was fantastic at doing the integration side. The other two,
Yeah.
not so much. It was that, okay, we're going to acquire you, but you'll still be the CEO of your own business. So you make all the decisions. That doesn't necessarily work. So there's
Hmm.
there's a mix. So I was just kind of curious on your philosophy around that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So it really depends on again, I would say from the mission. Why did you even acquire this company? And you would imagine when you acquired this company, you had these conversations with the acquiring or the acquired company about what the vision looks like and how they play into it. And if the answer is you do your own thing in your own sandbox, I agree, that doesn't work at all. And sometimes, as you imagine, most times there's an earnout when it comes to those kind of things. And if the answer is there isn't, then you basically found a new partner. And if they're a new partner, they better be part of this entire larger vision. They better be bought in to this grander schema so that way their mentality is ready for that change. That change management component is like, look, I am part of this team. I'm not just going to be here for 2 years, make sure my previous company performs and get the hell out. And I would say it is a mistake. To be very clear, if you just let them operate in their own sandbox, you're like, oh, there's value creation here. We're just going to spend some money to pick them up. I do agree that friction that you did not want to address, or maybe just didn't think about addressing, will become greater and greater because could be countercultural, they could be counterproductive to your larger mission. And it goes back to without having that full cohesion, that is a mistake. And I think that, to your point, a lot of times it might be just some finance individual, like I said, who makes a decision, says, this is a good opportunity. We can grow our top line. There's some synergies here, and they leave it at that. And I think you have to look at it a much broader perspective. You have to look at the management team. You have to look at the shared vision. Or if the answer is because they have such a minority stake, maybe it's not shared vision. Maybe you just need to get on board.
Yeah, that shared vision is certainly key to that whole thing.
I agree. I agree.
What KPIs or dashboards do you monitor at a portfolio or fund level to track health, risk, or return potential?
Yeah, for us, it's multi. I think they're pretty standard, quite honestly. So we have a full kind of build out related to where we think the projections of a commercialization model looks like. So it's going to be like where the capital is going, how it's growing from an ROI perspective, as well as, honestly, if the campaigning is working or not working. From a legacy business standpoint or the core business, I would say that they're pretty standard. We're pretty old and we have the same kind of customers. We're trying to build some new ones. I think more there is creating cost efficiencies. So we did do a lot of optimization since I've been there, not only on the gross margin standpoint, but also on the OpEx standpoint, because it goes back to if you have a team that's been doing this for a really long time, the question is what can we do it more effectively and more efficiently? And it goes back to, I think, just going back to the strategic consulting side of the house, if you're not questioning those things consistently, you're going to get very comfortable and you'll like lifestyle it and you'll just hang out. And which is great, but great can be greater. You can really find some optimization there. So I would say that when you're more mature, looking for those opportunities of efficiencies are really important. When you're building a new rocket ship, though, I think that it goes back to the very standard models that you would imagine that they run. And like I said, I'm being a little bit cryptic here because we are public, so I don't want to really focus on exactly what we're doing, but hopefully that gives you some context.
It does. In my role today, with my own little company, I always ask this question. So, if you had a fractional CIO or AI advisor embedded in your team, what internal system or process would you have them optimize first?
It goes back to actually one of your previous questions. So I think going from the QA, QC regulatory compliance side of the house to the operations to, let's say, the final financial slash administrative transactional stuff that occurs, that's pretty challenging. It really is. So I feel like if I could have a fractional CIO to really look at the synergies from a full verticality standpoint, and maybe it's not a full corporate, it could be, hey, you look at in foods, or you look at the core business, right? I think that those areas would be really helpful because we kind of talked about this earlier. It takes a lot of time. It doesn't matter even if you're in the business, there are nuances associated to it that you kind of need someone A to tease it out because it's a lot of time. But on the second part is having a third party evaluate that who has the experience, who has seen other companies. We don't have all the answers. We don't. And it doesn't matter how experienced you are, there's always going to be a new kind of jigsaw puzzle to kind of figure out, in which you can put in your tool belt. But I think that that's kind of where having someone fractional, having someone that's seen multiple angles and expertise across the board, because that's been their job, I feel is where it would add a lot of value in the large verticality areas. Because, I think internally, when you look at your own, oh, I understand this or whatever it is, and then you can focus on it, doing that mind share, doing that kind of community building and understanding that change management component and the end to end, I think that that's where the value really is, in my opinion.
I agree with you.
Hmm.
Well, biotech investment is evolving rapidly with AI, genomics, and data driven drug discovery. I'm curious how you see that
Hmm.
influencing BioAmerica's strategy in the broader capital markets for life sciences. So,
Yeah.
looking ahead 3 to 5 years, where do you see BioAmerica's role evolving? Is it an infrastructure platform, syndication, or vertical specialization?
Yeah. We have a very, we kind of talked about the rocket ship. We have a very specific um, goal. So, in the moniker of in foods, IBS, there's the in foods component. So this is what I love about it because I'm a platform guy. It's actually a platform test. So we have over 30 patents, and we have other disease states beyond IBS. So I think as we are able to adopt, and I think society is changing. You look about the younger generation, and they just did a poll. I think there's only like a little bit over 50% of Americans drinking. There's a lot more people like the clean life, if you will, and also looking at more holistic viewpoints of like, I don't want to be on a drug. And I think what we have created is an opportunity for someone who is suffering from a disease state, who doesn't know what to do, who doesn't want to get on a drug, or they are and it feels miserable, for them to have something that is not only just a diagnostic, but is a therapeutic to assist them to identify and strip out what's causing those triggers for their disease state to feel better. And IBS is only the start. So, as I mentioned, we have multiple other disease states that we have patents to that basically connect, if you will, the disease state with the food triggers and to identify that. I think once we can get this through to the medical community, we were, for instance, published in the June Journal of Gastroenterology, which is kind of the largest one. They don't talk about these kind of tests. So, to have that was a big breakthrough. And I think the more that we have kind of an adoption of this concept of being able to diagnose and also solve your problems. The second part in our industry in diagnostics, a lot of it is laboratory focused. Bring it at home is where it's at. You think about like more of the farmer, like think of Hims and Hers, right? They've been able to take, and for them, the value proposition is easy. Like you kind of know what you need and what your problem is, and they're there to solve it. But they've created an access. They've created basically a better mousetrap to obtain some of these things. I would say the same is for our industry. Being able to have a larger adoption of being able to have at home tests, keeping it affordable, and having it to be very I think accessible is really important. And then having that, just like I don't have to go to the doctor, go get my labs done just to like find what's going on with me. I can go and just order something online, or I can do it with confidence, of course, right? It's not coming from like Timu or whatever. And then you have something that really that you can help yourself quicker versus kind of going through the spin cycle of the normal medical pathway. So I think that those for our industry is very specific. I can wax poetic about the other areas, but I'll focus on my industry, if you will. I do believe that at home care, point of care is so important. And the other piece for us, that IBS for us is just the beginning.
Good. You know, you being a technologist too, so I have to dig into this a little bit.
Yeah.
What emerging technologies, either AI driven R&D, multiomics, digital biomarkers, federated data, what new emerging technologies excite you for biotech's next frontier?
I'm going to go sideways on this one. Uh, I think that tokenization is going to be really interesting. So beyond the crypto side of the house, and you really think about the kind of the blockchain usage, there's already blockchains for transactions. I wouldn't be surprised if we start biomarking and putting these in tokens. And I think that that would be really interesting to have that component, if you will. And I think that that could help security on your information. I think it allows a lot of the connectors to start being created with some of these, I would say, information and how it connects. I think that I'm going more broad here, is a huge opportunity. And I think that we're not that far off now that we have a little more acceptance of, I would call, digital assets or tokenization versus just, say 10 years ago when it was almost a joke, right? And I think that there's a huge opportunity between the synergy of the digital kind of tokenization world and healthcare. I think that there's a huge opportunity there for sure. Obviously, AI, precision, all those things. Yes, I love that, but I do think that once we start combining various technologies, if you will, that's when it gets really interesting.
Interesting. How are you seeing investor expectations shifting? Or are
Yeah,
you?
no, that's a yes, yes. So it went from take my money to, hey, you need to be profitable. I don't care like how good your idea or how far your MVPs have gone. You need to be profitable. So like cut like 70% of your people, to a more balanced approach. I think the investment thesis, I think the capital markets, even the VC side, I know that the debt structure with venture debt has changed a bit, a little more punitive, but it's starting to flow a bit more. So I do think it's almost there's almost like we went from one way, take your money, to you're gonna make cash. Like we need free cash flow, to somewhere in the middle. I think we're kind of somewhere in the middle again, which is a little bit nice because for a while it's like I don't know how long people are gonna keep holding on to their pocketbooks, given the fact that I think there's a lot of great investment opportunities out there. But there's a lot of uncertainty, obviously, as you can imagine, with kind of the global tensions and all those things. So, but in the end, the market doesn't seem to care. I mean, look at today. There was just literally today, it's a little bit down, but like it goes back to just generally speaking. I do believe people are kind of avoiding the noise, and from a broader macro trend, we are kind of coming more to center versus going the opposite directions.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as the investors' expectations are shifting, the risks and constraints are increasing, right? So, what constraints or risk are you watching? Is it regulatory, funding cycles, technology validation, talent? That's a big one.
All of it. I mean, look at the labor market. It's been soft for the last couple months. It looks like it's going to be even worse. And we won't know full numbers too, depending on how long, kind of, what's going on with the government. But that's concerning. Even though like the market is popping off, the labor side is really concerning. And I think even without getting into a whole new can of worms with AI enablement and also the loss of jobs. Like Accenture just laid off 11,000 people. It's like if you don't know AI, you're gone. So I think there's a whole kind of component there. In terms of investment thesis, we kind of talked about that as well. I think that that shift, we don't know. Let's say this labor just takes a huge dive and everyone starts panicking again. Then we're back to I'm not giving any money out, which then changes your thesis because you were trying to like go middle ground. We're going to do some investments here and there. I think that that is going to be really important. And then from a compliance standpoint, as you know, things keep changing. From a nerding out standpoint, we had a lot of things that were put in play, like proxies had to include pay for performance. We had segment reporting come out for trying to get more detailed. You had to have a chief decision maker identified. And then when it rolled out, it had no teeth. Then why are we even doing this? So I think that is one of those things where regulatory puts some burden on you. You kind of figure it out, then it's loosened up. So I think though, because all this takes time and money. It takes time and money. And if you don't know, and this is where, again, it goes back to when you're uncertain, then you hold on and try to figure things out and you kind of clench. And I hope that doesn't happen. And I think that's where, to your point, you have to look at all of it. For instance, we had to address the tariff situation because we have a manufacturing in Mexico. So that's something that we've been able to kind of weather. But that was a very practical thing that we were freaking out, trying to figure out, just like the rest of the world, when things kept changing on and off. We kind of got it stabilized. But my point is, that's just one example. And there's a lot of things even beyond, I would say, what's happening in the government to even change, like even our own company. So I do believe the answer is all of it. And if you're not looking at all of it, I mean, get ready to get slapped in the side of the head with by one of them.
Right. Exactly. Keep your head on a swivel.
Yeah.
Exactly. If you had unlimited capital and freedom, which we all wish we had, right? What new initiative
Yeah. Yeah.
what initiative or vertical would you think about launching under BioAmerica?
Yeah. I think if I had unlimited capital, I would do everything. I would re-look at the entire infrastructure, the data infrastructure. I would completely rebuild everything to how it would be perfect for us, even from a 5-7 year perspective, not just like a 2-3 year perspective, because that will help us drive great data analytics, better business intelligence, which will lead to the bigger, broader initiatives of being able to go through that. And I would rocket ship all the different verticals of the different disease states. I would probably start looking at some AI initiatives and figuring out how we can kind of almost combine AI with the diagnostic space of the house. I mean, and it also goes back to, if there's precision medicine, there's got to be precision diagnostics, and then being able to again enable AI to do that. And then hell, why not? Let's get into the blockchain side. Like I said, I think first step, infrastructure for sure, infrastructure. And I hate to say, I wouldn't really hire a ton of people until we really understood our goals. And obviously, we would fill the bucket and verticalities and find people who really want to believe in this unlimited resource mission, which is pretty cool. But that's where I'd probably start, honestly. Like, it just goes back to infrastructure. So important. And a lot of times when you're smaller, you can't, even though it's important, you just don't have the time or resources to really address it. I would nip that one in the bud. So that way you can build you have a nice solid foundation for your gigantic skyscraper.
Perfect. If you could give one key recommendation to founders or finance leaders in biotech aiming to succeed amidst uncertainty, what would that be?
I would say trust yourself, trust your network, trust your leadership, build. You need to understand your vision. You need to be introspective as well. You need to look within yourself. You need to look within your company to make sure that the things that you're founding, not even saying founding, I would say like what your vision is actually happening. If you're looking at it and every day you're not getting one step closer, you really need to evaluate that. Like step one. For the founders out there, watch your cap table. Let's say you're starting to see some really great traction and we need more money to like do this. Is it worth 25 to 30% if you go VC? I don't know. You really need to start thinking about those things, and you need to start thinking about your own people as well, because if you don't have a goal, maybe the goal is an exit, but whatever that is, you need to really understand what that is from the get-go, because if not, you might just be pulling not only your people but you along for a ride that you didn't even ask for, because eventually the more money that's invested in you is no longer your vision or your dreams, and it's one of those things you're going to be serving someone else. And if you didn't think about what you wanted from the get-go, what your kind of final mission is, or obviously it can evolve, but if you're, well, we'll just figure it out as it goes along, I think that is a huge mistake. So I think, again, that's almost introspective again. All right, a lot of it has to do with really where we even started from this conversation, really focusing on what you're trying to accomplish What is your outcome that you want to see for you and your team, or your dream, or your idea, and making sure that you do not overshoot it, but also don't give up the farm for it, just for quote unquote success, to like push the button or cut the ribbon or whatever it may be, ring the bell. So I think that is the advice I would give, because right now it is uncertain, but you know what? You can say that at any given time. We had the CDO crisis, we had the Y2K. I mean, look, we've all been through a lot. You trust yourself, trust the people in your inner circle, trust the vision, and make sure you're executing. That's what I would say.
That's great advice. Gary, thank you for sharing your strategic lens, challenges, and vision in the biotech finance world. Your ability to blend scientific risk and financial discipline is inspiring. For
Thank
our
you.
listeners, if you're building or investing in life science ventures and looking to bring rigor, systems, and adaptability into your finance operations, Gary's work offers a strong blueprint. Gary, for our listeners who want to find out more about you or BioAmerica, where should they go?
Yeah, so I would say if you want to find out more about InFoods, it'd be infoodsidbs.com. I think for me, just find me on LinkedIn or GaryLouCPA.com. And I think that LinkedIn is usually the easiest way. I'm pretty active there. And I'd be happy to obviously speak to founders and all that. And I just really appreciate the time and also the expertise. I know you didn't talk that much, but you have a wealth of information, expertise, and experience that, it's almost like we should flip it and then you can be interviewed because you have so much to give. So I really appreciate the time, Carl.
Thank you for that. If you're exploring how to apply AI, automations, or systems thinking in finance or operations, that's core to what we do at Proteligen. Let's talk. Until next time, ask better questions, build smarter systems, and stay on the edge of intelligence. Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, of course.